it's fun. Like intuitive eating is about keeping the satisfaction factor in your life, like making food a pleasurable experience, but also making food your tool. Like food is our nourishment. We don't live to eat, we eat to live.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Fit Vegan podcast episode. We have a special guest today, Amanda Sevilla. We had the opportunity to connect, I think over a few weeks ago, almost a week and a half. So basically, when I got to LA. Amanda is a registered dietitian, registered yoga teacher, certified in plant-based nutrition, and the intuitive eating is in process. Right? So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. The weather is nice. We're in late August, so it's like that hot/warm feeling, but not like too crazy. Had a lot of good food today, and I'm feeling very honored to be part of this podcast and excited to talk about what I'm passionate about. So thank you for having me.
Of course, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, and I know you're really passionate. That's why I'm excited to talk to you today about this like intuitive eating. But I think what would be very valuable for the audience as well, and for me too, because that's why I like doing podcasts. I just get to pick people's brain, is kind of get your initial story that brought you to the place that you're at, that makes you so passionate about this. And so what kind of got you into the world of nutrition, and specifically plant-based nutrition?
Everything just connects with each other. I love these origin stories. So, where do I start? Like, what really got me into nutrition was my older brother. So my siblings are all way, way older than me. I think the closest one to me is like 7 years older than me. And so my brother is 11 years older than me. So when I was in middle school, he was in college. My puppy's right next to me. She's playing with her toy. Just letting you know in case you hear that. She's like playing with the door stopper. So he started paying more attention to his nutrition and introducing me to different things. So I'm Filipino, and we grew up in like very like rice and meat heavy dishes, but more so just traditional. So things like pancakes and waffles for breakfast weren't really a thing. They were like, yeah, they weren't. We just had rice and eggs and whatever else my mom or dad made. So my brother started introducing me to different foods to make in the morning. One of them I'll never forget was like an English muffin with peanut butter, like crunchy peanut butter with bananas. I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is crazy. And I was in middle school, and that's when I started wanting to learn more about like different types of foods. And then, somewhere along the line from there, I think my heightened sensitivity and my heightened attention towards nutrition and food kind of led me down I don't want to say bad, because it eventually got me here, but it led me down a spiral of developing an eating disorder in like late high school. And this was, looking back and going through it with psychiatrists, therapists, was really just a form of control for myself. I was the youngest of a big family, and food was just like the first thing that I could change. Along with activities at school, it was just so easy to mask it. So I felt like that was a really, really easy way for me to gain control of my schedule, my life, my body autonomy, which is going to be a big theme coming up in intuitive eating too. I felt like that was the only way that I had autonomy, because when I came home, it was like, you have to eat this much food. You can't leave the table unless you finish it. You can't leave the house to go to school unless you finish your breakfast. You have to drink 3 glasses of milk a day. Like, I was very controlled in that aspect. And I know my parents cared, but I just felt like the best way to rebel was the opposite direction. However, obviously it wasn't great health-wise. And so I went through recovery. I actually was checked into a clinic, and I was there for like 4 months, I think. And it was really fast, because I understood what the problem was after I had been able to talk to therapists and the psychiatrist. But what really stuck for me was the fact that I like right before I went into the clinic, before I was like finally admitting that I had an eating disorder, I also read the book called Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. I might be saying that wrong, but it's called Eating Animals, endorsed by Natalie Portman, interesting enough. And that was about the ethical side of eating animals and where, like, he went over kind of the genesis of why people are vegetarian. Again, the ethical and moral standpoint on that. And I was reading it, and I was actually on a plane to the Philippines when I was reading it. I was with my dad. And I decided during that plane ride that I didn't want to eat animals when I was there. So I ate a lot of the veggie dishes. And like going to an Asian country is really easy. Traveling while vegan, a lot of people think that traveling vegan is difficult, and you already know this, but it's really not, especially if you're going to an Asian country.
Mhm.
Because there's tofu, there's vegetables, there's rice. If you're looking for like impossible or gardein or like cauliflower wings, you're probably not going to get it every day, but there are choices out there more. And like even 10 years ago, it was easy for me to it was easy for me to find options there. So um on the plane ride back, I was like, I don't want to eat animals anymore. And when I was going through my recovery, I actually continued to be vegetarian, and they offered me to challenge, like, okay, so are you vegetarian because you actually care about animals, or which is also okay, or are you vegetarian because you're scared of specific food groups? Because that's also a thing. Like some people
Yeah.
came into the clinic and they were vegan and they realized like, oh, I'm not actually vegan. I just didn't want to eat dairy and meat because it's high in calories. Um, which like, okay, that's awesome that you understand that. And for some people, like that balance is absolutely necessary because the mental health is it really dictates what you do with the rest of your physical health. Please give me a second. My dog is
Yeah, no worries.
she's starting to shred the carpet, and so it's off limits.
We don't want to have to change the carpet.
You know what? There's a corner in our room that's we have to change it now because like it sounded like she was playing with one of her toys, but she was ripping the carpet, and so I didn't pay attention. Okay, so and they challenged me to eat chicken just to see. And because I was already open-minded about, I really wanted to heal this like psychological aspect of my health. I
Mhm.
tried it, and I didn't feel guilty because I knew it was a food challenge just to see if like is there like what is the reaction that comes up. So I ate the lunch instead of eating like the Gardein chicken. I ate like real chicken, animal chicken, and I went back in the room with the dietitian and therapist, and they're like, how did it go? How do you feel? And I was like, the chicken was dry. It was like more dry than the Gardein that I normally eat, but like it was fine. And from that point, I noticed that that was like it veganism was an ethical issue for me as well. And I didn't feel tempted, or I didn't feel like I missed anything because at that point there were already really good alternatives. And that was like 10 years ago. So, I mean, there's great alternatives now. And I think it would have been like less of an issue for me then. Um, but anyway, moving out of that eating disorder clinic, and I graduated high school and then I went to college. My one of my family friends introduced the paleo diet to me, and I was like still trying to figure out like how do I structure my meals at this point now that I'm like like recovered. And nobody told me about intuitive eating either, which was
Mhm.
difficult to it was difficult to transition without a structure because I didn't want to keep eating in accordance to the meal plan, which it's like counting macros. It's I forgot what the actual diet itself was called, but it was like you get exchanges. There's an exchange system. So I was supposed to eat like 8 exchanges of carbs a day and make sure each meal was balanced. And I just didn't want to do that. I like was already so turned off by numbers, and I felt like I didn't want to go into college having to count things and having to like measure things.
Mhm.
So one of my family friends taught me about the paleo diet, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll try this. And I didn't really enjoy it, mostly because a lot of it included meat. And so I found myself sticking to like a lot of vegetables and nuts and like root vegetables also. Like you could, I think on the paleo diet, it's like limit your fruit, which now, you know, this too is like, and even like as a dietitian, I can't believe that there's nutrition information out there that tells you to limit fruit. That's for like for a healthy person in a normal condition. So I tried that and I was like not feeling that good. And I think because of social media algorithms at that point, I stumbled across another type of way of eating that didn't involve counting calories as meticulously. And that was by Freely the Banana Girl.
Yeah.
And
And Durian Rider. I remember those two.
and Durian
Yeah.
Rider, did you partake?
I did do. Yeah, I did.
Right.
I did.
I feel like I feel like there's a group of vegans who went through that and like we've just all been traumatized together. Not in a, I mean like what they did works for them and it worked for me for a little bit, which I'll get into, but I just feel like there's a specific group of vegans that can just relate. You're like, oh, I
So
don't
many bananas.
so many bananas. I was literally gonna say bananas. Like I like bananas still, but I just feel like I don't like them as much as I did before that. Like just
Not
something
30 a day.
changed. Yeah, something changed for me. But I was curious about it at that time. So I just thought, I'll just try it. Not even as like, oh, this is going to change my life or this is going to be great for my health. I was just like, this is crazy. No one's going to eat this much fruit and feel this good. I can't believe she's making all these videos about it. And like, she looks so happy about what she's eating every day. But I proved myself wrong. And it turns out that what I was missing was a lot more carbohydrates and a lot more fruit and just like immediate energy for my brain. I was in college back then and I had moved across the country and it was a lot colder. It was in Boston. And I just felt so full of life and so energetic. In high school, I did endurance sports. I did swim and cross country until like my senior year, like when it wasn't healthy for me. But I had never been able to run half marathons weekly or bi-weekly the way that I did when I switched over to eating a very high carb vegan diet. And I tried it as an experiment just to see how it would go. And I ended up really liking it. I felt good results within the first week. And this is just like me not expecting anything, right? But I noticed that like my mind was more clear. I noticed that I could perform not only athletically, but also academically way, way, way better. I also love the way that I digested food. And I loved what my food looked like. I'm like, wow, there's just so much color. There's so much life here. It's so vibrant and it was so cheap. I barely spent money. And what was really fun is that in Boston, there's like it's like a farmer's market, but it's more like the overflow discount groceries that are like, if you don't eat it within the next week, it's probably going to be bad.
Yeah.
So I would shop there a lot and I probably spent more like $20 a week for my own groceries or sometimes even less just because there's like so much. And I was eating a lot of fruit back then too. I remember I would buy like a big box of persimmon for like $8 and it was like big box.
Yeah. A lot of mono
Which is
meals.
lots of mono meals. Correct. And so from there, I started not only physically feeling better, but I decided to learn more about it. And I was like, okay, I understand the ethical side of it, but I watched Earthlings again just to double check. And I was like, yep, I'm crying. So this makes sense for me. That's my
Yeah.
measure. I'm like, how hard do I cry?
Yeah.
That's how much I care. But, it's not the same for everyone. I watched Cowspiracy, and that was my first introduction to the environmental impact that a meat heavy or just animal product heavy diet has on the world. And that made a lot of sense to me too. I'm like, oh, everybody here bikes, they're trying to recycle, but they all still like sit down to eat like meat products. And I just felt like I had like another little missing key. And then I learned about the health implications. So I already knew from Freely and Durian Rider's videos that it was good for your health. But I was like, where's the science? Like, I want to see it. At that time, I was going to a school that focused on like medical sciences. So I felt a little bit more comfortable with medical research, scientific research, and reading it. And I just could not believe what I was reading. Like, pretty much all the preventable diseases or all the diseases that my family members suffered and have suffered from, like my late family members at this point, were all preventable. We're talking diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, high cholesterol, things like kidney disease, even like liver disease and colon cancer. Um, what else? Just using those as like the main, but obviously there are a lot of preventable diseases out there that are affected by food. And these diseases that I just mentioned, oh, and gout, are very characteristic of, at least in my culture, like within my family, like the Filipino people, like pretty much every Filipino in their 50s or 60s that I know, I'd say like 95% of them has some sort of heart disease or diabetes. And when I look at the diet and like examine it a little bit more, like, yeah, they have some vegetables, but very meat heavy. And I remember a long time ago, my dad told me stories of his childhood where long ago, his family would eat like big mounds of rice and like a small piece of chicken because that's all they could really afford. But that's
Mhm.
a time before McDonald's and KFC and all these Western restaurants started coming over there, where they barely had rates of obesity. And now it's like I go there and it's just interesting to me how similar body shapes are to that of the United States at this point because of all this westernization. And at that time I wanted to be a physician, and I thought like, oh, I have so much, like I feel like I have all this like information that only a small group of people know. I really 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 want to dig into it, and as a provider I will definitely want to have more, I would say, expertise or like experience in nutrition. Doctors in the United States don't get that much education on nutrition, as you probably know. It's like anywhere between 10 to 20 to 30 hours, like contact hours of like being in a nutrition class. And even then they just learn about what a carb is and that water is an essential nutrient and like where to get
The
these foods.
basic. Yeah.
The basic, like, yeah, just not really getting into the implications of a specific diet and lifestyle for specific diseases, which is justified. Doctors have to know a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
So I wanted to be that person to both know nutrition and be a physician. So I changed my major to nutrition. And I also thought that, like, okay, if I want to do plant-based and if I want to share it with the world, I should know if it's legitimate or not. Like, I just don't want to be sharing information that is just biased to me and like a small group of people. And throughout my undergrad and finishing with my nutrition degree, I was vegan. There were like two professors that I had that were predominantly whole food plant-based. I finished my degree in Loma Linda University, which is one of the seven, oh wait, is it seven or five blue? I think it's five blue zones. Five, yeah.
Yeah.
So in one of the five blue zones of the world, I'm like, the people at the gym, like early in the morning, there were like these like 70, 80-year olds on the elliptical that were like going at levels harder than I could go for a warm up. And they were talking and they were healthy. And they all happened to rest more, have community, but also not eat a lot of meat. So it was a vegetarian institute. A couple of my classmates were vegan as well, and I never had any pushback on the diet being healthy or feasible. So with that confidence, after I graduated, I already had all the education and internship experience that I needed to get my like become a registered dietitian, which I didn't plan on it. I just wanted to do nutrition, learn nutrition, and then use that major to go to med school. But I thought, okay, well, if I like already have everything I need to be a dietitian, I should just do that, get some clinical experience. So experience with more acute cases in the hospital and also networking and learning about other healthcare professions, and then apply to med school. So um, when I was working in the hospital, I noticed that it was really difficult for me to get the point across to patients. And like in the outpatient setting, they know what they're supposed to do, but more often than not, they just didn't comply. And these are people who had heart attacks. They were in the hospital and they had to get a stent or like an even bigger surgery, or they lost a foot because they're diabetic. And, they got instructions from the dietitians about what to eat, what not to eat, what's good and what's bad. And they go home and they're like, I just can't do it, which led me to think about like why is this a problem, like why is it so hard for people to really stick to a plan. And I thought about all the times that I'd like undergone like the paleo diet, for example, or um, even that 30 bananas a day challenge or just eating raw till 4. I thought about why it's so difficult for people to sustain eating in a specific way. And what I realized is that it's because we don't like the external plans and the rules and guidelines, they take away our own autonomy from like choosing. So they take away our power in what we want to eat. Instead of making this a, oh, this looks delicious, I'm going to eat it, it's like, oh, I have to eat it or I can't eat it. So I did a little bit more research, and then I learned about intuitive eating, which was at that point something that I had already naturally fallen into. Eating high carb was fun, but I didn't like being super full all the time. I also found that I was craving things like avocado and olives and more soy protein and like a lot more, yeah, a lot more tofu, a lot more things that weren't within like a very high carb, like what is it, like 80-10-10 diet. I wanted
Yeah.
to eat more than just 10%. I wanted to eat like 20% or like 30% some days. So I just shifted very, very gradually to like include more fat and protein in my diet. So I was literally just experimenting with myself and found that what worked best for me was actually not trying at all and eating what felt good to me and what I knew was balanced based on my like nutrition education. And that's literally just making sure I can see a carb, a fat, a protein, and some kind of color. And also giving myself the permission to, if I just want to eat one color, like if I just want to eat bread with like vegan butter and that's really, really, really what I want, I found that if I don't eat it, then I'm just going to keep thinking about it. So in my quest to find out like why can't my patients like follow a meal plan, why can't they just do what's recommended, I learned about intuitive eating. And intuitive eating really, really changed my viewpoint on dieting, on overall health. Um, so using the 5 blue zones as an example, they have like a structure of what they found all the people in these blue zones do. They like, there's numbers associated with it, however many hours of socializing, however many servings of fruits and vegetables. But that's just inherently what these people in the blue zones do because they know that that's what feels good to them, because they're able to exercise their own body autonomy and they're able to choose on their own like what they need on a daily basis and really listen to their inner guidance. And that's what intuitive eating is really all about. It's not eat all the burgers and french fries and drink all the milkshakes until you blow over. It's allow it because it's fun. Like intuitive eating is about keeping keeping the satisfaction factor in your life, like making food a pleasurable experience, but also making food your tool. Like food is our nourishment. We don't live to eat, we eat to live, but it should be something that we enjoy doing and it should be food that we enjoy, which changes every day. Because like we eat all the time, like who wants to make eating food like an unpleasant experience? Like I barely know any people who really truly deep down want to do that.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I fell into intuitive eating. And I went to India for yoga teacher training. And there they also talk about eating to nourish your body, but also enjoying the food. Yoga and Ayurveda is like the sister science of yoga. It's
Yeah.
the traditional medicine that was just thousands of years old, like the original, like the mother medicine. Even Ayurveda recommends having like all 5 tastes in your meal and allowing your body to say like, okay, this is what I want. Like I want more sweets today, I want more salty today, but like having all of those together. So I really feel like training in yoga in India really helped immerse me into a more, I would say, like dynamic relationship with food in a way where I get to use my external wisdom. So what we know, like the USDA, we don't use a food pyramid anymore, the my plate, as well as my internal wisdom, like how do I feel today? do I want a bag of potato chips, or do I want to feel how I felt yesterday when I ate that whole bag of potato chips? No? Okay. Am I thinking I want something fresh? Okay, cool. It's really like a collaborative experience. And it's really interesting to now teach that to other people who have been through this yo-yo dieting lifestyle of like, okay, I gotta lose weight. So I'm gonna go on this crash diet, 1500 calories. And oh my gosh, I ate a cookie and now my diet's just out the window and I don't know how to sustain it. And now I'm lost. And then they'll like eat 10 cookies and they'll be like, tomorrow, new diet. But it's just this like
Constant
loss.
battle. Yeah.
Yeah, this constant battle. It's following external guidelines that take away your own autonomy over your food choices that cause people to continue to fall into it. It's called the binge and restrict cycle. Because if
Mhm.
you start restricting, then you break it, you'll binge, and then you'll feel bad, and then you'll start restricting again, and it just keeps going around. So it's been really fulfilling, honestly, to be able to teach people about listening to their own inner signals, really respecting their hunger and really feeling their fullness and reassuring themselves that like this pizza is going to be here tomorrow, so you don't have to eat it all right now, and you're allowed to eat whatever you want as long as you're keeping your body in mind. So yeah, I think that's how I ended up over here.
That's amazing. Well,
Thank
there's a,
you.
first of all, I want to say thank you for opening up and sharing your story. I know it's not always easy to share those stories. So I appreciate you doing that and sharing that with us. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, I feel like we've been through a similar journey of the trying to raw vegan, raw till 4, and then 80-10-10. And then I feel like if everyone kind of
So
started
interesting.
vegan back in those years, we all went through a similar journey to get to here. Um,
Right.
and so I really love the idea of intuitive eating because I was in the cycle of like binge restrict.
Hmm.
And so I implement a lot of what you shared with our members, because I don't think that being obsessed over the metrics of like, if a cup of rice is 44 grams, like a cup is a cup, like, all right, you don't need to have it exactly on the
Hmm.
dot. One question I've always wondered is, when you're eating some of the processed foods, right? They're created to make you want more. And so
Hmm.
where comes the line where it's like, this is what my body wants, or this is what, because I ate, for example, Oreos, and now it's triggering me to want more sugar, right?
Hmm.
So where's the differentiation between like, this is what my body wants, but oh, this is what my brain wants because it was chemically triggered through certain foods? Have you ever encountered that?
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many, I would say, avenues within intuitive eating that addresses this. And I think this is what like turns people away from intuitive eating, is because they're so confused about this dilemma. So intuitive eating is very much based on, although we talk about like no restrictions, eat whatever you want, it also keeps in mind your body, like how your body feels. So if you are eating Oreos and you are full, the question in intuitive eating is, what am I eating for? Am I eating because it tastes good? And it's totally okay to eat food just because it tastes good. That's how we find out what we like and what we don't like. It's how we find out which, like there's these new chips at the store and they're giving out samples and I didn't think I liked them, but I actually do. So cool. Or like a hummus dip. Um, but it's also important to take into account like how does your body feel right now. If you're eating just for taste and for pleasure, that's totally okay. But also keep in mind, that with that, keep in mind the past wisdom. So I mentioned before that there is this external wisdom, what we learn in schools, what we learn in the media, what professionals teach us, and then there's also this internal wisdom. What happened last time I ate a whole sleeve of Oreos when I wasn't hungry? Like, what happened after that? Like, how did I feel that night? Did I sleep well? Did I wake up and feel like I was hungry? Did I still wake up and feel like there was stuff in my body? Do I like that feeling? Do I want to continue that? Or am I okay just eating one Oreo and I know that I can eat another one later on and it'll feel better when I'm hungry too? Um, so it's kind of integrating, right? That external wisdom, or sorry, that internal wisdom of the past, how you feel right now. So maybe you're eating an Oreo, you're not hungry, you literally just ate dinner, but Oreos sound really good. So you're going to have one. And just that sounding really good, that's listening also to your internal wisdom, because your heart's like, oh my gosh, I want Oreo. But then continuing to listen to that internal wisdom, where after you finish that Oreo, you think, am I good? Do I feel satisfied? How does my hunger feel? How does my body feel? And there are a lot of times, even like this was me last night. I was just sitting and I finished eating dinner and I was like, I'm full, but I feel like I could eat something else. So I kept, even a dietitian who talks about intuitive eating, I like went around my pantry and kind of just like thought about what I wanted to eat. But this time it wasn't in desperation. It wasn't in like, oh my gosh, what's the sweet that I can eat right now? Because like, so I'll use intermittent fasting as an example. Like 8 o'clock's gonna hit, I'm like not gonna be able to eat anything. I just gave myself the permission. I like took a bite of a cookie and I was like, no, that's not it. Like took a bite of ice cream and I was like, that's also not it. And then I realized I just wanted fruit, which was crazy. But I was like, actually my boyfriend mentioned it to me. He's like, I think you just want fruit. So I ate some blueberries and I was like, oh yeah, that's actually what I wanted. But the difference is that I gave myself that permission to
Mm.
try it and try each bite fully and really ask myself how that feels within, and how I think it'll feel afterwards. So like with the cookie, I was like, I think a cookie sounds good, but I know that last time I had one, like my mouth just felt weird and I was just like oddly full after dinner because it's like kind of hefty. But mostly like that mouth feel. I didn't want that mouth feel. So bringing it back to your question, it really is, it's just integrating all the senses and all the past wisdom that you have, the current wisdom, and like really keeping in mind how you're feeling during that process. And what a lot of people notice, I just had a client too. She's like, whenever I start eating a bag of chips, especially like the Ruffles, the really, really crunchy ones, like I just finished the whole entire bag. So I asked her to keep some things in mind. One of them was, how are you feeling when you're eating it? So sometimes we eat food or we want to eat like a very rich tasting food or a processed food that's meant for us to continue eating. Sometimes we eat it because we're really like trying to fill an emotional void. So I like it's crunchy food, right? And usually people who eat crunchy food emotionally eat it when they're anxious or when they feel agitated or angry. So I just asked her to pay attention to how she feels, like pay attention to how you feel before you eat the chips, give yourself permission to eat the chips, but really just like be with yourself, be mindful. When we are completely present and in our bodies and in the moment of eating, it's easier for us to make decisions that are for our higher good. It's easier for us to make decisions as a caretaker to our bodies rather than like trying to impulsively take out an emotion on our own bodies, because we are mindful, so we understand that like later on it probably won't feel good. So she so I asked her to keep that into account, and then I also asked her to, if she is full or if she is hungry, even ask her like, or ask yourself like what you need. So if you're full and you're eating, like what do you need? Do you just need a hug? Do you want to take a walk? Do you need to take a deep big breath and like fill your lungs and exhale? Maybe you need to exercise, and not in a way to burn calories, but really to get endorphins going. Or if you are hungry, is potato chips really what you feel like you need? Or do you think you could nourish yourself with something better, something more grounding, something that'll keep you satisfied longer and that'll actually help you feel better after you eat it? And she came back the next week and she was like, I had chips and then I stopped eating the chips. She was just shocked, you know? She was like, I realized I was really annoyed. And when I noticed that and I ate the chips because she gave herself permission to, she remembered that she's like, the chips just didn't taste good. Like I knew I was annoyed, and they're the same kind of chips that she usually eats, and she gets to the bottom of it and she claims she loved them, but when she ate a couple of them she was like, they don't taste that good. Like I just need to vent right now, I need to journal. So it's totally possible to still have those foods in your life as you are an intuitive eater and as somebody who is like mostly whole food plant-based, or someone as somebody who really believes in like overall holistic health. It's possible to keep those in your life, because at that time you're more able to keep things like in a holistic approach and take into account like from all avenues. Instead of just thinking like, oh my gosh, this food is processed and it's made for me to continue eating it, I will continue eating it. You now have, after learning intuitive eating or practicing it, you have the tools to take back that power, take over, take that autonomy, that repeating word, because it's very big in intuitive eating. But just in knowing it and practicing it, you're now empowered to make the decisions as your body's caretaker versus like under the control of a big corporation who wants you to spend money and be unhealthy.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
You're
There's
welcome.
so I think from what you shared, that moment where you get to pause and ask yourself these questions, right? Why
Hmm.
am I eating this? That's a name it a skill that takes a while to acquire, right? Because if
Hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced like the binge cycle and all that, you're just eating and eventually
Yeah.
kind of wake up and you're like, oh damn, I just ate the whole thing. Do you
Hmm.
find that there's a transition period once people commit to intuitive eating and then they're like trying to be aware as they're doing some of these behaviors? Do you find that there's a transition time for people to start becoming more aware when they're doing these actions?
Yeah, yeah. So for some people, it's like right away, like the client I told you about. We only had a couple sessions together. And so now we're like seeing each other like months in between, just as little check-ins. But she understood right away most of her problems with eating were very emotional. And she also works with a therapist too. And for some of my other clients, it really takes a while for it to kick in because there could be more than just emotional eating. Maybe it's like they really, really believe that they need to lose weight. And in that area, we talk about like what true health is. What are the actual biomarkers of health, and where does this need to lose weight so desperately that you have a bad relationship with food comes from? And it's totally okay to want to lose weight, want to gain more muscle, have more definition. Like that is everybody's right. But just decoding that motivation really helps people too, but that also takes a while because it could be that, it could be also emotional eating. um, what else? They could also be out of touch with their hunger and fullness signals just because they have been dieting for so long that they've learned how to ignore their hunger. So regarding the transition period, it really just depends on how much work the person wants to put in or has to put in. And going with the wants to put in, like how much they really like want to change, how much they really want to commit to this process. It's really intimidating to people who have been dieting for their whole lives. They're like, I can't just not diet. Like I need a
Can I
structure. I
not
need,
track?
yeah, like I can't just not track my macros. I need to know like how many grams of protein that I have to hit per day. So yeah, I would say that the transition period is evident. Some clients will be like, oh, it was really good one day. Good and bad are also terminologies that I try to steer away from and teach, educate my clients to also steer away from, because that puts judgment on yourself and your food choices. And food is at the very base of it, it's when the food that we eat is not, it's not an issue of morals. Um, okay, so some vegans will not agree with me, but I'm talking about like junk food versus like whole food, plant-based food. Like it's not an issue of morality. So, um, shoot, where was I going with this? I always go on side tangents and I always hope that I
It
will,
loops
I
back.
always hope, yeah, I always hope. Usually I'm good at it, but there's always like one in a conversation that I forget.
So it's
Oh,
talking about transition time.
yes. So some clients will say that they had like a mindful day, a mindful moment, and they were like really happy about that. But then the next day they didn't. And they're frustrated about that. So what I do is just tell them like, hey, you had that mindful moment. You might have two next week. You might have three next week. You might have like only one again next week, but you know what that feels like. And I've never had a client who didn't like the way it felt. They were all very surprised at like, oh, it was full. And then I got hungry later and I ate and it felt really good. And I didn't feel out of control. And I felt like I was really in tune and in step and following the rhythm of my body. But again, there's like that, oh, I had like the snack munchies at night. I don't know what happened. So we do like little tweaks there, and that's why it's important to, if you're starting out with intuitive eating and really feel like you're like stuck in a diet mentality mindset and you really want to get out of it, it's I wouldn't say necessary. I would not say necessary, but I would say it's very helpful to work with somebody who is educated in intuitive eating training or on the path to becoming certified. Like I've been doing it for a long time. It's just like I haven't finished the certification, which is just like this really long test, but I've had success. So that's all I can use as my background at this point. But it's important to like work with somebody who is empathetic and who really
Yeah.
understands the topic itself, because we can help you pinpoint why something didn't work. So maybe you had like the midnight munchies because you didn't eat like a bigger lunch. Even if you were very mindful of your dinner, there are some not psychological, there are physiological components at play. So regarding transition time, it's very variable. Different for everybody, but there always is a transition time. And I like to say that we talk about progress and not perfection. And there is a metaphor that I really, really like about intuitive eating, and just the journey to become the intuitive eater is almost like going on a freehand hike. So one where you don't know really where to go, but it's just like you want to get to the top of the mountain and there's a bunch of trails. So you could get to the top of the mountain going on the right trail, which is also fun, but more often than not, you're likely to go down a trail that's wrong. So you have to
Mhm.
turn around and then go like continue the original path that you're on. But on that other trail, you're like, you saw some cool rocks, you saw a butterfly. On the other trail, you also learned like this is not the correct trail. So we go back and then go on the same path, and hopefully, if you keep trudging along, you'll get to the top of the mountain. You might get to other trails that aren't the ones for this specific hike, but the point is that on those other trails that aren't necessarily it, we learn a lot along the way. And even though it seems like steps back in intuitive eating, it's actually steps forward because we get to learn a lot about ourselves. So it's always progress. It's a long process for most people. I would say that I'm still in the process of it as well. But it's definitely like where I am is so different from where I was before I started learning about intuitive eating and incorporating it into my life.
Yeah, I feel like it's a well-worthy process to go through. I think in terms of sustainability and longevity in mental health and overall health, it's a process that's worthy to take on. It's definitely it's the one of the next steps for me is to move into
Hmm.
that. And yeah, there's always been that like that initial question was like genuinely for me of like what is chemically being triggered and what is like actual my hunger cues. So two questions I want to ask. One of them is you mentioned when you got out of the recovery center and then you got introduced to paleo because you didn't necessarily have any structure to follow.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
within intuitive eating, is there any structures or guideline that you kind of give to people that potentially people that are listening that want to start that process? What are some guidelines that they can pay attention to?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the first, oh, actually, I want to preface this answer with the fact that intuitive eating was created by two registered dietitians. So we're not just trying to get you guys to eat junk food all the time and forget about health and balance, because it's definitely necessary, um, especially to stay healthy for a long period of time. Um, well, but the nutrition portion comes at the very end, because what most people need to work on is their relationship with their food, with their mindset, with their bodies, and then we go into the nutrition guidelines, which are very similar. They just go along with like the My Plate and what the whole food plant-based diet looks like as well. Obviously not as strict unless you really want to. So the beginning of it is really to there's 10 principles. So 10, number 10 is the last one, that's nutrition. The first one is to reject the diet mentality. And that's basically saying like, no more calorie counting, no more weighing myself every day, or using any external tools as a metric for progress within myself, or using any need for external validation to tell me that I'm healthy. So that part is very much about like really understanding and getting to the root of why we follow a diet, and also talking about what diets end up doing to our bodies. Because over the long term, a calorie restricted diet, when we're not eating enough, we're exercising too much, can lead to a slower metabolism. There was like a Biggest Loser study that was done a long time ago, but they found that the average participant, their metabolism was lowered by like 500 or 700 calories a day.
They're
But
pretty intense what they do on there.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, super intense. And like I'm pretty sure that the normal person who's like yo-yo dieting even would not go to those extremes. But it is safe to say that dieting for an extended period of time just causes our metabolism to slow down. So I use this beginning point, as like my opportunity to educate, just to say that, first of all, we don't really know how the energy that we're eating is going to be used in our bodies. I like that you mentioned the 44 grams versus a cup. Just like put it in there, because who knows, like really, like how dense was the rice when we cooked it? How heavy is it actually? How much water did you use? How much energy from that rice, especially if it's brown rice, how much of it is actually going to be broken down by our bodies and then absorbed? And then how much is our intestines actually going to take and store in our glycogen, so in our liver and muscles? And then I like to use the metaphor of a banana as well, because like, okay, it's a large banana. Like, are you actually going to measure it? Like, are you going to measure how thick the skin is too? Because that affects that, like we don't know 100% what the calories and macros are in the food that we're eating. It's really just we're just eyeballing for the most part, even if we try to bring numbers into it. And so I use that point, as well as the fact that like our bodies will operate on their own accord. Our bodies honestly are still in like Paleolithic times right now. If we're going on a diet for a very long time, our bodies think, oh my gosh, there's not enough food. She's rationing because she's trying to save the energy supply. Everybody slow down. We don't need to be burning as much energy. We don't need to be as warm. Let's just like hold back a little bit on expending energy. So that's what our body sees. But what our minds see is like, oh my gosh, like my diet's not working. So very long-winded answer. For like first part of the answer is just like, rejecting the diet mentality, really learning what diets and long-term restrictions do to our body. And then after that, it's okay, I get it, Amanda, no more diets. Now what? Like what then do I do? How do I follow? And the next thing is like, okay, well, the big thing is to eat when you're hungry and respect. So not necessarily stop when you're full, but like respect your status, like your satiation.
Mm.
And even there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because some people don't know what that feels like. So I can go through like two or three sessions just working with somebody about what does hunger feel like in your body. We don't really pay attention to it that much, especially chronic dieters, because chronic dieters are trained to eat whatever's on the plate and that's all we get, and then move on. So it's really weird to just like allow yourself to not finish a meal because you actually feel full, or to get a second serving because you actually still feel hungry. So it's really like paying attention to your hunger signals, and if necessary, re-regulating those hunger signals, because for some people, they just don't feel hungry ever. And that's just like the body's response to us not responding to their hunger cues. So it's like a friend is knocking on your door asking like, hey, do you have food? And like, if you never ever answer it, or if you keep saying no, then they'll stop coming around. But it's easy to bring it back. You just have to continue going on like a regular schedule, and you'll find that your body regulates pretty quickly for most people. And then after that, it's so learning the hunger and fullness signals. And then we talk about the next principles are about Oh, so respecting your fullness and hunger are actually like separate principles, but I just lump them together when I talk about it, just because it's like along the same lines. And then we go into things like respecting your body and exercising because it feels good. And so paleo has a little bit more strict guidelines. A lot of like ways of eating have more strict guidelines than intuitive eating, because intuitive eating is technically like there's no guidelines. It's really just pay attention to your body, really feel your body, and weed out those voices in your head that are probably from like people who've had expectations of you, or like, people that you compare yourself to at school or on the media. Like, that's not you. Like, people on social media too, like their voices can also be living in someone's head rent free, because they'll like dieters will listen to, well, I call it food police. It's what it's called in intuitive eating. So they'll listen to the food police and be like, oh, I shouldn't eat another thing because it's not healthy. So we go through, weeding out like what is actually nourishing me and what is actually like not helping me be my best self, not helping me enjoy this action of eating. And then we go into, again, respecting your body, exercising, and then talking about the guidelines of nutrition. And that last tenet really ties everything together, just to emphasize that, like, when you do steps 1 through 9, you will naturally fall into eating what feels good for your body, because you'll be able to really listen to your internal wisdom, and not be so controlled by your external wisdom. Because the reality is, if you eat like a big meal, super heavy, right? Of like a double cheeseburger, plant-based, if that's your thing, and French fries. That's just my favorite metaphor, just because like when I think about it, it's so heavy, and like cheese pizza. The next day, if you're really listening to your body and feeling how you feel and understanding, like that you are the caretaker of your body, the next day you're probably not going to want to eat that again. You're probably going to want to eat something, well, you're going to eat, because in intuitive eating we learned that it's important to eat and not just restrict because you had a big fun meal, but you're going to want to choose something that's more nourishing for your body, something that feels a little lighter because you had something heavier. So maybe like more fruits and more vegetables, but also not making that the rest of your diet for the rest of your life because you had a cheat meal. So innately, my clients end up choosing to eat. It's funny because people who are like actually who've gone through intuitive eating and like kind of graduated in the process eat a lot of healthier foods. They eat a lot more whole food,
Mhm.
plant-based foods, more color, more fresh foods, because they know that that's what feels good in their bodies. But then you'll also notice that they are also the people who are so down to eat a slice of cake. Sometimes they finish it, sometimes they don't, but they're like so open to trying things because they know like what they're eating is in accordance to how they feel.
Yeah, it's I don't know if you've heard of this person, because I think that's basically what she did, intuitive eating. You know who Stephanie Buttermore is? All in?
Yes, yes. Hmm.
Yeah. So I watched her first video when she said she was going to go all in, and I've watched the whole process. So
Hmm.
that's very much intuitive eating, what she did throughout the whole
Yeah,
process.
pretty much. And like that all in process that she did is part of intuitive eating. I mean, you watch it, so you're probably familiar with it already, but there's this big part of intuitive eating, which is eating with, it's called with unconditional permission to eat. So giving yourself all the permission in the world to eat whatever you want. So it's basically what she did in the beginning. And as she did it, I was already like a dietitian and like coaching people through intuitive eating. So I understood what was happening, and I like already had a feeling that where she is now is where she was going to end up. Like I knew she wouldn't be at that like plus 40 that she was earlier. So it was interesting to me to like read some of the comments and watch. I didn't even watch the reaction videos, but like I saw like little snippets, because these people truly didn't understand that like we really can trust our bodies as long as we give ourselves that permission to eat whatever we want and really listen to what we feel like. Our bodies will adjust, our bodies will be totally fine. I think diet culture takes away a lot of our autonomy and also a lot of the trust. They're like, here's this plan. Don't trust yourself. You could trust us. You don't have to think about it. Just do this thing. At the same time, give us your $70 billion a year, please. That's how much the diet industry rakes in. I think it's 70 billion. But yeah, it's pretty much along the same lines of what she did. And that beginning part, like I was saying, is that like rejecting the diet mentality. That's like that first step where she rejected it. She said she wasn't going to fight it anymore and give herself that unconditional permission to eat what she truly, truly felt like. And even though she ate to extreme fullness, I'm, of course, I'm a spectator. What do I know? I don't know her personally, but I feel like I read people pretty well. So when I was watching her videos, it just seemed to me that she was well aware of how full she was going to get, but
Mhm.
the pros of eating everything that she felt like eating way outweighed the cons of that aftermath. And so it was very, very interesting for me to watch as well, as somebody who's like in this field anyway. It's like, just, I mean, I wouldn't say that it was perfect, but it was very close to perfect case study.
Yeah. And yeah, it was, and you could see well, at least like you mentioned, I could see that that's where she was going to end up after. She wasn't going to stay this heavy.
Hmm.
And, from having stepped on stage, just like she did, like that deep rooted hunger that you just can't satisfy. Like I related so much to that. And so that's why I was interested to see her process of like
Hmm.
how she was, because she was really good at documenting it. And so I think that it's a well worthy process to go through once
Hmm.
people are ready to take that on. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
thing. You have to be ready for it. I mean, I knew about intuitive, like very briefly knew about intuitive eating too when I started veganism, but I just wasn't ready for that. Like I didn't know how that worked. I didn't have like the trust in that structure. And for a lot of people too, like they hear about intuitive eating, but they're like, maybe after this next diet. Um, but it has to be just like anything, right? Just like eating plant-based or going vegan or changing your career or whatever, like you have to be ready for it. You have to actually want that for it to be successful. Um, is that something that you ended up doing too? Did you have that whole like eating with unconditional permission and like exploring all the things?
Yes, yeah, I did for a long time. Yeah, put on some weight and then lost it again.
Mm.
Yeah, it was definitely a good process, and it's because of those experiences that I structured my nutrition the way that I do now with my members. Right? There's no
That's
good or bad
awesome.
food. You want to make substitutions, make substitutions. A cup is a cup. A cup is not 45 grams.
Hmm.
And just having that flexibility, that food freedom.
Hmm.
And the biggest part is making sure it's sustainable, right? Because like I was doing some research before. I was watching a YouTube video. I think you did vegan keto for a bit. And I was
Yeah,
like, you know what?
yeah.
If that's how people feel and that's sustainable to them, perfect. Then do that.
Hmm.
Right. But if high carb, you feel like you're eating high carb, whole food, plant based, and that's sustainable for you, then do that. Right. Don't the biggest part is compliance. If you don't comply to whatever you're supposed to, like you want to be doing, then you're never going to do it, and you're not going to get the
Exactly.
results out of it.
Exactly. And I love that you mentioned that, like, if it works for you and you like it, do it. I don't knock people for following a high fat vegan diet or like even closer to keto, or people who really truly just don't want to eat food with oil. And then, like, how do I know what's going on in their head? And also, if it really works for them, then it works
Mm-hmm.
for them. I work with so many unique people who like and dislike like really specific things that
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, it's individual and it really is a subjective experience. It's self-guided. Obviously, if you're the one hiking up the mountain, you are in control. And to a lot of people, it's scary, but it's nice to have resources like Stephanie Buttermore's journey, like your program as well, that just encourages people to like think outside the box, but also look within.
Yeah. And that's what I find amazing about like the work you're doing as well. Like it's not about the food you mentioned. It's
Mm-hmm.
about the emotion and what's in between our two ears. It just comes
Mm-hmm.
down to that. I always tell people, like, if I could snap my fingers, give you the body that you want, nothing would be fixed, right?
Exactly.
The issues would still be there, and those need to be addressed when you take on that transformation process.
Yeah, 100%. Even more so with like transforming your body, because some people they'll change their entire body and they look in the mirror and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it would feel like.
Yeah, I still feel insecure, still feel like shit, like
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
changed.
yeah.
Yeah.
I still feel like not in control of anything. What happened? Um, and so that's why I love this process also, because it's so individual. And then one of the things that I always tell people, like what I love the most about working in the field that I work in, is that I really get to help people feel more empowered in their lives. So especially in the hospital, like people don't know what specific medications, most patients don't know what like the medications are, what it does, and they don't have control over the dosage. Just the doctor writes the prescription, they go get it from the pharmacy, and that's it. With food, like you are in control of, I mean, if it doesn't cure your disease 100%, you at least are in control of how it feels,
Mm-hmm.
because what you eat will affect your digestion, or like you could feel it in your stomach. You could feel it passing through. You can feel how the energy, or how the food gives you energy. And so I love the fact that not just in like working as a dietitian, but like also through intuitive eating, I give people the tools to really like empower themselves to be their doctor, their caretaker, um, and to really just like take matters into their own hands, because I feel like that's what we need more than ever. Like, yeah, we need people to teach us and we need really great leaders, but what we also need is that like awareness. We all have awareness, but that awareness to be like rekindled, um, and to re-spark this relationship, like this dynamic relationship we have with food and exercise and like mental health, mindset, self-esteem, and all that. Like they all go together, and I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, get back to the place where we trust ourselves in the
Mm-hmm.
decisions that we're making.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. And I know that you're doing amazing work with your clients. And again, I was doing a bunch of research before a podcast.
Like a good
But
podcast host.
yes, yeah, I'll do my research. And I was like, I'm gonna link everything down below for so people can find you and ask you questions and reach out, because I know this is gonna resonate with a lot of people, because I know the
Mm-hmm.
conversations that I have on my Instagram, and a lot of people are gonna benefit from this episode. But is there something in particular that you're working on right now that you'd like to bring attention to?
Right now, let's see. So right now I work as dietitian, so I have like my own services. But I mentioned this very, very briefly earlier. So I did yoga teacher training in India, and I talked a little bit about Ayurveda. I also talked about how I was going to be a doctor, but like in the past few months, I don't know what happened. I just like woke up and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. So right now, I'm starting my Ayurvedic medicine program very, very soon.
Nice.
And so if your listeners, so if all of you guys are listening to this, maybe like in a year or two, I mean, podcasts are evergreen. So hopefully there'll be some of you. I'll be doing Ayurvedic consultations there, which are basically just holistic diet, lifestyle tips to get you back on track. And this is a science that's like thousands of years old with like millions of case studies. And that's what I'm working on. I'm super excited for that. But in the meantime, I will be teaching anybody who wants to learn about intuitive eating. I talk about it. So I have my nutrition page, my nutrition Instagram, and then kind of briefly on my main Instagram page as well, which will be linked. But yeah, that's my main focus, or it will be my main focus for the next coming years. And I'm really excited to bring that into the vegan fitness, nutrition, wellness space.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful. I'm excited for you. And I'm excited for
Thank you.
people to get to know more. You have a good YouTube channel as well. Again, I was just watching a ton of video. So I knew you had
Thank
stopped.
you.
I knew you had stopped med school because I watched that
Ooh,
video.
ooh, thank you. Appreciate that. You do your research.
Yeah. Well, I honestly thank you very much for taking the time to share your knowledge, share your story with us. I know for a fact it's going to be really valuable to a lot of people. And again, like you said, podcasts live on forever. So I know that the impact's going to continue to live on. And so thank you for your time. And is there any last words of wisdom that you want to share?
Oh my gosh, so much pressure. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Drink your water. I have my water bottle right here, and I was actually thinking about like how much I don't drink enough water. So
Drink
that's
your
my
water.
wisdom. I feel like I shared a lot during this whole podcast.
Yeah, you
So
did.
something a little bit more superficial is just drink your water. And thank you for listening, for those who are listening, and thank you, Lucky, for having me on this podcast. I'm super excited to see how it goes, but also for all the other podcast episodes to come.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, everyone, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.